In the next few minutes, you're going to learn how to set up your Supabase account for whatever project you are working on. In this example, I'm going to make a simple to-do list app in NextJS, but you can apply this to any type of project. I will walk you through setting up your Supabase account, creating a table, and showing you how to add, fetch, and delete tasks with ease, all in just a few clicks. So let's get started. First things first, we're going to go to supabase.com, and if you don't have an account there, you're going to create a new account by clicking sign in. And you can either continue with GitHub, continue with SSO, or continue with your email and password combination. Once you're done with the registration process, you are going to go back and click Start Your Project here or here. You will first need to create your organization. It's a super easy 1 or 2 step process. And then after that, you are going to have an option to create your project. Once you've created your project, you will have something like this. So I created a project called To Do Private because it's a to-do list, and then you will have a bunch of different options such as table editor, which is something that we are actually going to look into, and you also have the SQL editor. So Supabase functions on top of SQL or SQL, and if you are good with SQL, you can actually write SQL commands here, and you will actually get things done just by writing SQL code. If you don't want to do that, or if you're not that good with SQL, you can go to table editor and create your tables and properties through visual interface. If you want to use SQL to create your table the same way that I did for this mini project, you can use this command here for creating a table called tasks, which has properties of ID, content, and created at, where ID and created at are automatic properties which are being generated automatically, and content is something that we are going to update on our own. This is a very simple table that you can make. If you don't want to do that, if you want to go through the table editor, you can also go create a table there, give your table a name, a description, and you can add your properties here and their types and default values and any foreign keys if you need foreign keys. And another thing that is going to be useful for you here is scrolling down and going to the project settings here in the navigation and going to the API option here in the configuration section is going to reveal to you your 2 Supabase properties that you are going to need for connecting with Supabase. Those are going to be your endpoint and your public key, which we are going to set up in our environment file. And that's basically it as far as the Supabase configuration in the Supabase account goes. Now we're going to go into my project. This isn't mandatory, at least according to Supabase documentation, but I highly suggest that you do this, and that is setting up your environment file. So I have in my root folder, I have .env.local file, and there I have supabase_URL and supabase_key properties. These are the 2 properties that I mentioned that you can find in your settings in your Supabase account, and you can set it up like this and copy paste your values here, and we are going to use those to connect to our Supabase client and fetch data from Supabase, delete our data, and add new data. Before proceeding, you will need to install the Supabase package. So to do that, you can use this command here. So I used yarn add @supabase/supabase-js, or you can, if you're using npm, you can use npm install and then this same thing here. And this should install and set up Supabase package for you, and then you can continue setting up the Supabase client. So this isn't going to be a full tutorial on how to set up your whole application, because if you're looking to set up your database, you're probably already working on something. If you're not, you can set up the same app that I did here. If you don't want to set it up, I will leave a link to my app before I set everything up, so you can have some basic code to follow along with, but this isn't going to be a full tutorial. And I forgot to show you what the app looks like. So I'm going to run yarn dev. So this is the mini app. It's very simple. It has an input text field where you can enter the text of your to-do assignment or task. There's a button to add a task, which has an on-click event, which is going to trigger our Supabase to add a new task. And these are the tasks that we already have. And this is the button that is used for deleting a task. So it's very simple. If you want to set that up, you can do it on your own, or I'm going to leave a link down below to a GitHub link where you can download my setup. Now, if you've installed your Supabase client, we can proceed by creating a Supabase client file. So I did it in my NextJS app. I did it in the app folder. So I have a supabaseClient.ts, which is a TypeScript file, and we can start adding code to it. So first, we are going to import our create client and Supabase client from the Supabase package that we installed. Next, we're going to define our properties. So these are the two properties that we have in our environment file, which we are picking up through process.env. So these are our Supabase URL and Supabase key, which are both strings, and we are assigning them to two constants here. And after that, we are assigning a new constant, which is going to be our Supabase client. We're creating our Supabase client property here by using the function that we imported from the Supabase package, and we are passing in our two Supabase properties, so our Supabase URL and Supabase anon key. And after that, we're just going to export our Supabase client, and we are done with the Supabase client setup. Next, we need to set up all of our API endpoints in our Next.js backend. The way I did it, in the source folder, I have the pages folder, and inside of that, I have the API folder, and inside of that, I have the tasks folder. And inside of the tasks folder, I have three different TypeScript files called index.ts, addTask, and deleteTask, which are going to be different endpoints. Index is going to be for fetching of the tasks, add is going to be for adding a task, and delete is going to be for deleting a task. If your app has a different structure, you can do whatever you like, but the main thing here is that we want all of our endpoints to be separate files. Now we can proceed with setting up the index.ts first, and you will see all of these are very, very, very similar. First things first, we are going to import, since this is a TypeScript file, we need to import the next API request and next API response, because we are going to assign it as our variables. Then we're going to import our Supabase client. And then we are going to create a default function handler, which is going to be an async function and which we're going to export by default. And it's going to have two parameters, which are the request and response, which are these types. So next API request and next API response. And first of all, we are going to check if the request method is equal to get, because if you remember, we are going to use the index to just fetch all of the tasks from Supabase, and we need to do that by using the get method. So if this is the get, then we're going to use the Supabase client, and basically this is the whole query that you need to write. From is the name of the table in Supabase from which you are fetching your data. So I named my table tasks, and so I need to enter from tasks. If you named your table something else, you need to write that other name that you set up. So from is from where are you pulling your data. Select is what data are you pulling. We're pulling everything. So as is the case in SQL, you write the star or asterisk symbol to pull everything. So select asterisk, and we are going to order it by the field, by the property created at, and the ordering is going to be descending. If we call that, we are going to get back our data, which is going to be our tasks. And if there is an error, we are also going to receive an error. And if there is an error, we are going to return our result with a status of 401, and we are going to return the error message. And if not, we're just going to return our result with a status of 200. And in the JSON, we are going to parse our tasks. as our result. And we are going to say if the request method wasn't get, we're going to send the message saying, hey, this method is not allowed. And that's basically the whole setup. If we go to the add endpoint, our add.ts file, you can notice that I already have some code set up here, which is basically the same stuff that we are doing in the index file, we are doing in the add file as well. The only thing different here is that we are checking if the request method is post, because if we are adding a new task, then we need to do it through the post method. Once we have checked that the method is post, we can proceed. So first of all, we are going to get our content through our request body. So once we create a request to the API, we are going to pass in our content, which is going to be the text value from this text input. And we're going to set that as a content property here. And then we're going to create another call to our Supabase client. But this time we are using insert because we are inserting a new row in our SQL table. So we are basically calling our Supabase client the same way that we did in index. We are doing our operation on the tasks table, but we are calling insert. And in insert, we are passing in our content here as an object inside of an array. If you have more properties that you want to update, you would update them all at the same time, of course, but we are updating just this one property here. After that, we're going to do an immediate select. Of course, if there's an error, we are going to return that error, but we are doing an immediate select because that way Supabase is going to return to us the actual row that has been updated. You might not need to do this, but the idea here for me at least was there are two properties that are being added automatically in Supabase in this use case, in this example. So our ID and our created add property are being added automatically. I am adding just the content. So basically I'm going to write the content of the task. I'm going to add a task to my table, and then I'm going to fetch all the other data so I can use it in my app. I ended up not using it, but that was the idea here. So you might not need this because if you leave this out and if you just want the confirmation that everything went through, insert is basically going to give you a very limited response. I believe it's just the status code and possibly a message. And that's pretty much it for the add endpoint. Moving over to the delete endpoint, we have everything set up as before, but this time we are checking if the request method equals to delete. And if it does, we are going to pick up our ID from the request body. Because we just need the ID of the task that we want to delete. And then we're checking if there is an ID, if we actually received an ID. And then if we don't have an ID, we are going to return a response with an error message saying that we need the task ID, which is a required property. And if we do have an ID, we are going to once again call our Supabase client. We are going to operate on the tasks table, and we are going to call the delete. After delete, we are going to call the match function, which is going to match our ID to whatever needs to be deleted. So basically, if the entries match, have a matching ID, they are going to be deleted. And if there is an error happening, we are going to return an error message. And the delete does not actually return any sort of data, so we are not returning any data. If everything was completed successfully, we're just going to return our result with a status message of task deleted successfully. And that's it for the delete setup as well. I basically have one tasks component, which is a client component, which has the implementation of my code, which I'm using on my main page. So I have a div with a form, and form has an onSubmit event, which calls the addTask function. I have the submit button with the addTask, which submits the form and it calls the addTask. I have a simple use state here for loading check. So if my data is loading, I'm just going to display this string here. And if my data has been loaded, then I'm going to map through my tasks. And you can see I'm just using an unordered list. And I am showing the task's content, and I'm displaying a button here which has an on-click event which calls the deleteTask function with the task ID. For my use case, I am fetching all of the tasks on component load, so I'm using useEffect for that. If you want to do it any other way, you are free to do so. I'm calling the fetch on API/tasks, which is my API endpoint. So if you remember, we are using index for the fetching part, and if you're using index, then that's basically your root, and you don't need to have any other endpoint after your main folder. So fetching API tasks, then we are running our response through JSON. We are getting some data from there, and I'm just setting the tasks to that data. So I have set tasks here, and we are passing in our data there. And after that, I'm setting isLoading to be false, so I don't have the isLoading string anymore. And that's basically it. So that it's very simple to fetch your tasks with Supabase. Now, moving on to my addTask function, I have the addTask set up as an async function, which accepts an event, which is the type of form event. First of all, we are preventing defaults on top of that event, and then we are fetching our API/tasks/add API endpoint. To do that, we need to also pass in our basic parameters, such as the method, which, if you remember, we are checking if the method equals to post. So we need to do that. We need to set up that. We are setting up our headers here, and the main part, we are setting our content to be our request body. And what is the content? The content for me is set up to be the value of this input. So every time there is an on-change event happening for this input field, I am setting the content to be the value of the input. And this is a required property, so you cannot submit a form without it. So every time I edit my input text field, the content property is being set, and then I'm using that same content property to pass it into the body of the request, and I am sending it to this route. And we are getting some response from this after a while. If our response is okay, we are then going to create a new task. So like I said, the idea here is that I was going to use the data that I got from Supabase, such as the date and the ID, which I ended up not using, except for we are using the ID as the key, but that's not that relevant. I was going to use the date as well, but I ended up not using it. So you might be able to skip this step completely and just use your content and your ID that you generated on your own. So I've set it up to create a new task once we get the response and run it through the JSON, and we would set the task by appending the new task before all of the previous tasks, because we have it ordered by the last task being on top. And then after that, we would just refresh the content, and that is basically set up for adding a new task. And for the deleteTask, we are setting the deleteTask function to be an async function which accepts an ID, which is a number. We are once again asynchronously fetching the delete endpoint here, so API/task/delete. And same as for the add method, we need to set up our input parameters here, which are the method needs to be set to delete because we are checking for that. We are setting our header, and for the body, we are passing in our ID, JSON stringify ID as our body. And then we are checking if the response was okay. If response was okay, then we are basically locally refreshing our state, so we don't need to do another regular fetch to fetch just the non-deleted tasks. We know that the task has been deleted, and now we are going to manually remove it from the state as well. So we're just setting tasks to filtered previous tasks where the task ID does not match to the ID of the task that we just deleted. And that's pretty much it. That's the whole setup for fetching, adding, and deleting new tasks. It's a very simple application. We can check and see how it works. I'm getting the loading tasks, and then I get my tasks in here. So I can add a new task. Let's say write a poem, and I can click enter, and that is going to add a new task here. I can say cook lunch, and I can use the add task button as well, and it's going to add a cook lunch here. If I refresh, I can see all of the tasks are there. If I go back to my Supabase in my table editor and I can click on my tasks table, I can see all of my tasks here with all of their IDs and all of their created add properties. Now let's say I want to delete practice painting. So I'm going to click practice painting. I'm going to go back here and you can see it in real time. It's been removed from the Supabase table. So that's very, very neat, very cool library, very cool database with a lot of possibilities. If you want to learn how to set up Firebase for your project, I also have a video about that. Thank you for joining me in this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next one.